The woman's fingers trembled as she pressed them against the rough wooden planks of the saloon's back door, her stomach hollow with a hunger so fierce it made her dizzy. Rose Sutherland had not eaten a proper meal in 3 days, and the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread wafting from inside the Golden Star Saloon in Lead, South Dakota, was enough to make her forget every shred of pride she had left. It was late summer in 1876, and the mining town was bustling with prospectors who had come seeking their fortunes in the Black Hills gold rush. But Rose had found nothing except hardship since arriving 2 weeks ago with dreams that now seemed foolish and naive. She knocked softly on the back door, hoping the cook might take pity on her and offer some scraps, anything to quiet the gnawing ache in her belly. The door swung open, and a large woman with flour-dusted hands looked her up and down with a mixture of suspicion and annoyance. Rose opened her mouth to speak, to explain her desperate situation. But before she could form the words, the cook shook her head firmly and shut the door with a decisive thud that echoed through the narrow alley. Rose felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had come too far to give up now, though she was not entirely sure what she was fighting for anymore. Her parents had died of fever back in Ohio 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and the realization that she had no family, no prospects, and no future if she stayed. The advertisements for the West had promised opportunity and adventure, and Rose had scraped together every penny she had to make the journey. But Lead, South Dakota, had proven less welcoming than she had imagined, and the few jobs available for respectable women had already been claimed by others who had arrived before her. She leaned against the wall of the saloon, trying to gather her strength and decide what to do next. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and soon it would be dark. Rose knew she should return to the tiny boarding house room she had rented with her last few coins, but the thought of spending another night alone with her hunger and fear was almost unbearable. "You looking for something, miss?" The voice came from behind her, deep and gentle despite its roughness. Rose turned quickly, startled, and found herself facing a tall man in his mid-20s with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty leather chaps over worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. His dark brown hair was slightly too long, curling at the edges beneath the brim, and there was something in his expression that made Rose feel both cautious and oddly safe at the same time. "I was hoping for some food," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have not eaten in some time, and I thought perhaps the cook might have something to spare." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes taking in her threadbare dress, her thin frame, and the desperate hunger she could not quite hide. Rose felt her cheeks burn with shame, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. She had nothing left to lose, and if this stranger chose to mock her situation, she would somehow find the strength to walk away with her head held high. "Come with me," he said finally, gesturing toward the front of the building. "I will buy you dinner inside." Rose hesitated, years of warnings about trusting strange men echoing in her mind. But her stomach cramped painfully, reminding her that she was in no position to refuse genuine kindness, if that was what this was. She followed him around the building and through the swinging doors of the Golden Star Saloon, acutely aware of the curious stares they attracted as they entered. The interior was loud and smoky, filled with miners and cowboys drinking whiskey and playing cards. A piano player in the corner was pounding out a lively tune, and several painted ladies were circulating among the tables, laughing and flirting with the customers. Rose felt terribly out of place in her modest dress with her hair coming loose from its pins, but the cowboy guided her to a table in the back corner with a gentle hand on her elbow. "Sit down," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "My name is Ethan Quinn, and you look like you are about to fall over. When was the last time you had a real meal?" "3 days ago," Rose admitted as she sank gratefully into the chair. "And that was only some bread and a bit of cheese. I am Rose Sutherland, and I apologize for my appearance. I did not expect to find myself in such circumstances when I came west." Ethan signaled to one of the serving girls and ordered 2 plates of the evening special, along with coffee and water. Rose watched him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion, unable to understand why this stranger was being so kind to her. Most people had looked through her as though she did not exist, or worse, had assumed she was a woman of ill repute because she was alone and clearly desperate. "Where are you from, Rose Sutherland?" Ethan asked, leaning back in his chair and studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Ohio originally," she replied, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "My parents died of fever 6 months ago, and there was nothing left for me there. I saw advertisements about opportunities in the West, and I thought perhaps I could start fresh somewhere new. But Lead has been less welcoming than I hoped, and I am afraid my funds have run out more quickly than I anticipated." The serving girl arrived with their coffee, and Rose wrapped her hands around the warm cup, savoring the heat that seeped into her cold fingers. She had been so focused on finding food that she had not realized how chilled she had become in the evening air. "The West can be hard on people who come here with dreams but no plan," Ethan said, his tone matter of fact rather than judgmental. "Lead is full of prospectors looking to strike it rich, but most of them will leave poorer than they arrived. What kind of work were you hoping to find?" Rose felt her cheeks flush again. "I can read and write well, and I am good with numbers. I had hoped to find work as a teacher or perhaps keeping books for one of the merchants. But there are more people seeking work than there are jobs available, and I am afraid I have not had much success." Their food arrived then, and Rose had to force herself not to fall upon it like a starving animal. The plate was piled high with roasted beef, potatoes, carrots, and thick slices of bread with butter, and it was the most beautiful thing she had seen in weeks. She picked up her fork with shaking hands and took a small, careful bite, fighting the urge to eat too quickly and make herself sick. Ethan ate his own meal in silence for a few minutes, giving her time to satisfy the worst of her hunger. Rose was grateful for his tact, and she found herself relaxing slightly as the food began to restore her strength. Finally, when she had eaten about half of what was on her plate, she set down her fork and looked across the table at him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked directly. "You do not know me, and you have no reason to spend your money on a stranger." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "My mother died when I was young," he said finally. "She got sick one winter, and my father had gone to town for supplies. By the time he got back, it was too late. I was only 8 years old, but I remember what it felt like to be helpless, to watch someone suffer and not be able to do anything about it. I suppose I never forgot that feeling, and when I see someone in need, I try to help if I can." His honesty touched something deep in Rose's chest, and she felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I am very grateful," she said softly. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along. I was starting to lose hope." "Hope is sometimes all we have out here," Ethan replied. "But you need more than hope to survive. You need a plan and probably some help. How much money do you have left?" Rose felt the familiar shame creeping back, but she forced herself to answer honestly. "Enough to pay for my room for 3 more nights, and that is all. After that, I do not know what I will do." Ethan frowned, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. The boarding house where you are staying is at Mrs. Patterson's place on Main Street. Yes, Rose confirmed, surprised that he knew it. How did you know? It is the only respectable boarding house in Lead that would rent to a woman alone, Ethan explained. Mrs. Patterson is a decent woman, but she runs a business, and she will not let you stay if you cannot pay. You need to find work quickly, or you will be in serious trouble. Rose nodded miserably, knowing he was right. I've tried everywhere, she said, her voice catching slightly. No one is hiring, or if they are, they want someone with experience or connections. I am just a stranger with nothing to offer. That is not true, Ethan said firmly. You said you can read and write and work with numbers. Those are valuable skills, and there are people who need them. The problem is that you are looking in the wrong places. Before Rose could ask what he meant, a commotion erupted near the front of the saloon. Raised voices and the sound of a chair scraping across the wooden floor drew everyone's attention, and Rose saw two men facing each other with the tense posture of those about to come to blows. One was a rough-looking miner with a scraggly beard, and the other was a younger man in a suit who looked like he might be a gambler or a merchant's son. You cheated, the miner shouted, his face red with anger and whiskey. I saw you slip that card from your sleeve. You are drunk and imagining things, the younger man replied coolly, but his hand had moved toward his jacket, and Rose realized with a spike of fear that he might be carrying a weapon. Ethan was on his feet in an instant, moving with a fluid grace that suggested he was no stranger to dangerous situations. He stepped between the two men, his hands raised in a calming gesture. Easy now, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet saloon. There is no need for this to get out of hand. Jake, you have had too much to drink and you know it. Go home and sleep it off, and things will look clearer in the morning. The miner called Jake wavered, his anger battling with what appeared to be respect for Ethan. He cheated, Quinn, he insisted, but some of the heat had gone out of his voice. I know what I saw. Maybe he did, and maybe you were seeing things, Ethan replied calmly. Either way, pulling iron in here is going to get someone killed, and it is not going to get your money back. Walk away now, and we can settle this properly tomorrow when you are sober. Jake stood there for a long moment, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Then, with a disgusted grunt, he turned and stalked out of the saloon, shouldering past the onlookers who quickly moved out of his way. The younger man straightened his jacket with a superior sneer, but Ethan turned to him with an expression that made the smile fade from his face. You might want to leave too, Ethan said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. Jake has friends, and they will not be as reasonable as I am. If you were cheating, you should take your winnings and get out of town before morning. If you were not cheating, you still should leave, because Jake will not believe it, and this will not end well for you either way. The younger man's face paled, and he gathered up his money from the table with hands that were not quite steady. He left quickly, and the normal noise and activity of the saloon gradually resumed. Ethan returned to their table, settling back into his chair as though nothing unusual had happened. You did that very well, Rose said, her heart still racing from the tension of the moment. Are you some kind of lawman? Ethan shook his head, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. No, I am just a cowboy who has been around long enough to know how to handle trouble before it gets out of control. I work for the Double Q Ranch about 10 miles outside of town, running cattle and breaking horses. I come into Lead once or twice a month for supplies and to blow off some steam, but I try to avoid getting involved in other people's problems. Yet you got involved in theirs, Rose pointed out, gesturing toward the door where the two men had departed. And in mine. I suppose I did, Ethan admitted. My father always said I had a bad habit of sticking my nose where it did not belong, but sometimes a little intervention can save a lot of trouble down the line. Rose finished the last of her meal, feeling more human than she had in days. The food had restored her strength, and Ethan's company had given her something she had not had in a long time, hope that perhaps things might improve. She studied him across the table, trying to understand this complicated man who seemed to be equal parts tough cowboy and gentle protector. "You mentioned that I was looking in the wrong places for work," she said, returning to their earlier conversation. "What did you mean by that?" Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "The merchants and shopkeepers in town already have help, or they cannot afford to hire anyone new. But the ranchers outside of town, they always need people who can keep books, manage supplies, and handle correspondence. Most cowboys cannot read or write beyond signing their names, and the ranchers themselves are too busy running their operations to keep proper records. If you could convince one of them to hire you, you would have steady work and a place to stay." "Do you think your employer would consider hiring me?" Rose asked, trying to keep the desperate hope out of her voice. "Maybe," Ethan said slowly. "Samuel Quinn, the man who owns the Double Q, is my uncle. He took me in after my father died in a stampede when I was 16, and he has been good to me. The ranch does need someone to help with the books and paperwork, and he has been complaining about it for months. But I cannot promise anything without talking to him first." "I would be grateful for any help you could offer," Rose said earnestly. "I am a hard worker and I learn quickly. If your uncle would just give me a chance, I would prove myself worthy of his trust." Ethan nodded, seeming to come to a decision. "I am heading back to the ranch tomorrow morning. If you want, you can come with me and meet my uncle. He can decide for himself whether to hire you or not. But I should warn you that ranch life is not easy, especially for someone who is not used to it. The work is hard, the days are long, and you will be living in the middle of nowhere with mostly men for company." "It sounds like paradise compared to starving in Lead," Rose replied with a weak smile. "And I am not afraid of hard work. I may not have experience with ranch life, but I am willing to learn whatever I need to know." "Then we have a plan," Ethan said, signaling for the serving girl to bring them more coffee. "Meet me at the livery stable at dawn tomorrow. I have to pick up some supplies first, and then we will ride out to the Double Q. Wear whatever you have that is most practical for riding, and bring whatever belongings you can carry. If my uncle hires you, you will be staying at the ranch. If he does not, I will bring you back to town and we will figure out something else." Rose felt a weight lift from her shoulders, and for the first time since arriving in South Dakota, she felt like she might actually have a future. "Thank you, Ethan Quinn," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect, and I will not forget it." "Just promise me you will not give up," Ethan said, his gray eyes serious. "The West breaks a lot of people, but it also makes some of them stronger. I have a feeling you are the type who gets stronger." They talked for another hour, and Rose found herself relaxing in Ethan's company in a way she had not experienced with anyone in a long time. He told her about life on the ranch, about the horses he trained and the cattle drives that took them across miles of open prairie. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents, and the small farm they had owned before the fever took them. The conversation flowed easily between them, and Rose realized with surprise that she was actually enjoying herself, despite the desperate circumstances that had brought them together. When the saloon began to empty out for the night, Ethan walked Rose back to her boarding house, maintaining a respectful distance, but staying close enough to discourage any unwanted attention from the remaining drunks stumbling through the streets. At the door to Mrs. Patterson's establishment. He tipped his hat to her. Dawn at the livery stable, he reminded her. Do not be late because I have a full day's work waiting for me at the ranch. I will be there, Rose promised. And Ethan, thank you again, for everything. She watched him walk away into the darkness, his tall frame gradually disappearing into the shadows. Then she went inside and climbed the narrow stairs to her tiny room, her mind racing with thoughts of the day's events and what tomorrow might bring. For the first time in weeks, she fell asleep with something other than fear gnawing at her insides. Rose woke before dawn, her body accustomed to early rising despite her recent hardships. She dressed in her most practical outfit, a simple brown skirt and white blouse with a shawl that could double as protection from the sun. Her belongings fit into a single carpet bag, a sad testament to how little she had left in the world. But as she looked at herself in the cracked mirror on the wall, she saw something in her reflection that had been missing for weeks: determination. The streets of Lead were quiet as she made her way to the livery stable, the sky just beginning to lighten in the east. She found Ethan already there, saddling 2 horses with efficient movements. He looked up as she approached, and a smile crossed his face. "You came," he said, sounding pleased. "I was not entirely sure you would." "I said I would be here," Rose replied, slightly offended that he had doubted her word. "I do not make promises I cannot keep." "Good," Ethan said approvingly. "That is an important quality out here. Can you ride?" Rose hesitated, then admitted, "I have ridden a little, but it has been several years, and I was never very skilled at it." "You will be riding with me then," Ethan decided. "We will take my horse, and I will lead the pack horse with the supplies. It will be slower, but safer for you." He helped her mount the large bay gelding, and then swung up behind her with easy grace. Rose found herself pressed against his chest, acutely aware of his warmth and the solid strength of his arms as he reached around her to take the reins. Her heart began to beat faster, though whether from nervousness about the ride or awareness of Ethan's closeness, she could not say. They rode out of Lead as the sun rose, painting the Black Hills in shades of gold and amber. The landscape was beautiful in a stark, rugged way that was entirely different from the gentle rolling farmland of Ohio. Pine-covered mountains rose on either side of them, and the air was crisp and clean, scented with sage and wildflowers. Rose found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait, lulled by the steady movement and the peaceful morning. "Tell me about your uncle," she said after they had been riding for about an hour. "What kind of man is he?" "Tough but fair," Ethan replied, his voice rumbling through his chest in a way that Rose could feel as well as hear. "He built the double Q from nothing, starting with a few head of cattle and a lot of determination. He is in his 50s now, and he has been alone since his wife died of pneumonia 8 years ago. They never had children, which is why he took me in when my father died. He treats me more like a son than a nephew, and I owe him everything I have." "He sounds like a good man," Rose said softly. "He is," Ethan confirmed. "But he is also practical, and he will not hire you out of charity. You will have to convince him that you can do the job and that having you at the ranch will not cause problems with the other men." "What kind of problems?" Rose asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Some cowboys get stupid around women," Ethan said bluntly. "They start fighting over attention, or they get distracted from their work, or they make unwanted advances. My uncle will not tolerate that kind of behavior, but he also will not want to deal with it in the first place. You will need to be professional and keep clear boundaries from the start." Rose nodded, understanding the practical wisdom of his advice. "I can do that," she said firmly. "I am there to work, not to flirt or cause trouble." "I believe you," Ethan said, and Rose felt absurdly pleased by his confidence in her. They rode in companionable silence for a while longer, the sun climbing higher in the sky and warming the air around them. Rose found herself noticing small details about Ethan. The way he sat easily in the saddle despite hours of riding, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard physical labor, the faint scent of leather and soap that clung to his clothes. She realized with a start that she was attracted to him, and the realization made her blush and feel confused at the same time. It was foolish to develop feelings for him, she told herself sternly. He had shown her kindness when she needed it desperately, but that did not mean he saw her as anything more than someone in need of help. She was a charity case, a starving woman he had found begging at the back door of a saloon. Even if by some miracle his uncle hired her, she would be an employee at his ranch, nothing more. But despite her stern self-lectures, Rose could not quite suppress the flutter in her chest when Ethan pointed out a hawk circling overhead, or the warmth that spread through her when he adjusted his hold to keep her more secure as they navigated a rocky section of the trail. She had been alone for so long, and the simple comfort of human contact was almost overwhelming in its intensity. The Double Q Ranch came into view just before noon, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley between two pine-covered ridges. The main house was a solid two-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and one side. There were several outbuildings, including a large barn, a bunkhouse for the cowboys, and various sheds and corrals. Cattle dotted the grassland beyond the buildings, and Rose could see several men on horseback moving among the herd. "It is bigger than I expected," Rose said, impressed despite her nervousness. "My uncle has done well for himself," Ethan agreed, a note of pride in his voice. "The Double Q runs about 3,000 head of cattle now, and we have some of the best grazing land in this part of South Dakota. It took years of hard work to build it up to this size, but it has been worth it." They rode into the yard, and several men stopped what they were doing to stare at them with open curiosity. Rose could feel their eyes on her, assessing and judging, and she lifted her chin and tried to project confidence she did not entirely feel. Ethan dismounted and then helped her down, his hands steady on her waist as her feet touched the ground. "Wait here," he said quietly. "I will find my uncle and talk to him first. It will go better if I explain the situation before you meet him." Rose nodded and stood beside the horse, trying not to fidget under the continued stares of the ranch hands. One of them, a lanky young man with red hair, started to approach her with a friendly grin, but a sharp word from an older cowboy stopped him in his tracks. Rose was grateful for the intervention, knowing that Ethan's warning about men getting stupid around women had been entirely accurate. Ethan emerged from the main house a few minutes later with an older man who could only be his uncle. Samuel Quinn was tall and broad-shouldered, with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades spent outdoors. His blue eyes were sharp and assessing as he looked Rose over, but there was no hostility in his expression, only careful consideration. "Miss Sutherland," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "My nephew tells me you are looking for work and that you have skills with reading, writing, and numbers. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Rose replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I can read and write fluently. I am proficient with mathematics, and I have experience keeping household accounts. I am also a hard worker and I learn quickly. If you are willing to give me a chance, I promise I will not disappoint you." Samuel studied her for a long moment, and Rose forced herself to stand still under his scrutiny. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Ethan says you are desperate for work, and that you were begging for scraps behind the saloon in Lead when he found you. I appreciate honesty, so I will be honest with you. I do need help with the ranch books and correspondence, and I have been putting it off for months because I hate paperwork. But having a woman on a ranch full of men can cause complications, and I need to know that you can handle yourself with professionalism and good sense." "I understand your concerns, Mr. Quinn," Rose said steadily. "I am here to work, not to cause trouble or distraction. I know my presence will be unusual, but I am willing to prove myself if you will give me the opportunity." Samuel glanced at Ethan, who gave a slight nod. "All right," the older man said. "I will give you a trial period of 1 month. You will have a room in the main house, and you will take your meals with me and my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. Your primary responsibility will be keeping the ranch accounts, managing supply orders, and handling correspondence with buyers and suppliers. I will pay you $30 a month plus room and board. If at the end of the month you are working out well, we will make the arrangement permanent. If not, I will pay you for the time worked and arrange transportation back to Lead. Does that sound fair?" "More than fair, Mr. Quinn," Rose said, relief flooding through her so intensely she felt lightheaded. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. I will work hard to prove I am worthy of your trust." "See that you do," Samuel said gruffly, but there was a hint of kindness in his eyes. "Ethan, show Miss Sutherland to the spare room upstairs, and then have Mrs. Chen get her settled. I want her to start work tomorrow morning after breakfast." Ethan picked up Rose's carpet bag and led her into the house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture and rugs on the wooden floors. It was clear that Samuel Quinn had invested in making his home pleasant, not just functional. They climbed a staircase to the second floor, and Ethan showed her to a small but clean room with a bed, a dresser, a chair, and a window that looked out over the valley. "It is not fancy, but it is comfortable," Ethan said, setting her bag on the bed. "Mrs. Chen is the housekeeper, and she is also the cook. She is Chinese, and some people in town give her trouble because of it, but my uncle will not tolerate any disrespect toward her. She is a good woman, and she runs this house with an iron hand, so do not cross her." "I would never," Rose assured him. "I am grateful to be here, and I will respect everyone who works on this ranch." Ethan studied her for a moment, and Rose thought she saw something warm in his gray eyes. "I am glad you came," he said quietly. "I think you will do well here. And Rose, if anyone gives you trouble, you come to me or my uncle immediately. We do not tolerate harassment of any kind on the double Q." "Thank you, Ethan," Rose said, her voice soft, "for everything. I do not think I can ever repay you for what you have done for me." "You do not owe me anything," Ethan replied. "Just do your job well and be happy. That is all the repayment I need." He left then, and Rose sat down on the bed, her legs suddenly weak as the reality of her situation sank in. Less than 24 hours ago, she had been begging for scraps behind a saloon, starving and terrified and alone. Now she had a job, a place to stay, and the possibility of a real future. And she owed it all to a cowboy with kind eyes who had seen her desperation and chosen to help rather than look away. Mrs. Chen appeared a short time later, a tiny woman with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She looked Rose over with the same assessing gaze Samuel had used, and Rose felt herself being measured and judged once again. "You are the new bookkeeper," Mrs. Chen said, her English heavily accented but clear. "Mr. Quinn says you start tomorrow. Today, you rest and settle in. Dinner is at 6 o'clock and we eat together in the dining room. Do not be late." "I will be there," Rose promised. "And Mrs. Chen, thank you for welcoming me to your home." The housekeeper's stern expression softened slightly. "This is Mr. Quinn's home, not mine. But I run the household, and I expect respect and hard work from everyone under this roof. If you can do those things, we will get along fine. Rose spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking her meager belongings and exploring the house. She met several of the ranch hands when they came in for their evening meal, eating at a separate table in the large kitchen while Rose, Samuel, Ethan, and Mrs. Chen dined in the more formal dining room. The food was excellent, a hearty stew with fresh bread and apple pie for dessert, and Rose ate with genuine appetite rather than desperate hunger for the first time in weeks. The conversation at dinner was mostly about ranch business, with Samuel and Ethan discussing cattle movements and plans for the upcoming fall roundup. Rose listened carefully, trying to learn as much as she could about the operation she would be helping to manage. She asked a few questions about the bookkeeping system currently in use, and Samuel admitted with some embarrassment that it was haphazard at best. "I have been keeping receipts and notes in a box in my office," he said. "But I have not actually balanced the books in about 6 months, and I am sure there are errors and omissions. Your first task will be sorting through that mess and figuring out where we actually stand financially." "I can do that," Rose said confidently. "It may take some time to sort everything out, but I will have accurate records for you as soon as possible." Samuel nodded approvingly, and Rose felt a glow of satisfaction at his obvious confidence in her abilities. After dinner, she excused herself and went upstairs to her room, suddenly exhausted from the emotional and physical strain of the past few days. She fell asleep almost immediately, and for the first time in months, she did not have nightmares about being alone and starving. The next morning, Rose woke early and dressed carefully in her best dress, wanting to make a good impression on her first day of work. She found Samuel already in his office, a cluttered room off the main parlor that was filled with papers, ledgers, and the general chaos of a man who hated paperwork. He showed her the infamous box of receipts and notes, and Rose had to suppress a gasp at the disorganized jumble of documents it contained. "I know it is a disaster," Samuel said ruefully. "That is why I need help. Take whatever time you need to sort through it, and let me know if you have any questions. I will be out working with the men most of the day, but Ethan knows almost as much about the ranch finances as I do, so you can ask him if you need information." Rose rolled up her sleeves metaphorically and dove into the work. She spent the entire day sorting receipts, organizing documents, and beginning the painstaking process of reconstructing the ranch's financial records. It was tedious work, but she found it deeply satisfying, using skills that had been lying dormant since her parents' death. By the end of the day, she had created a basic organizational system and had begun to get a sense of the ranch's financial situation. Ethan stopped by the office in the late afternoon, dusty and tired from a day of working cattle. He leaned against the doorframe and watched her work for a moment, a slight smile on his face. "How is it going?" he asked. "It is a challenge," Rose admitted, looking up from the ledger she was updating. "But I am making progress. Your uncle is actually doing better financially than he probably realizes, but his record keeping has been so poor that it is hard for him to see it." "That sounds like my uncle," Ethan said with a chuckle. "He is brilliant with cattle and horses, but he hates anything that involves sitting at a desk. I am glad you are here to take that burden off him." "I am glad to be here," Rose said sincerely. "This is exactly the kind of work I am good at, and it feels wonderful to be useful again." Ethan's expression grew serious. "I wanted to check on you and make sure no one has been giving you any trouble. Some of the men can be rough around the edges, but they are good workers, and they will respect you if you respect them." "Everyone has been very professional," Rose assured him. "Your uncle's expectations are clearly understood, and no one has said or done anything inappropriate." Good, Ethan said, relief evident in his voice. I will leave you to your work then. But Rose, if you need anything at all, you can come to me. I mean that. I know, Rose said softly, meeting his eyes, and I appreciate it more than I can say. The days settled into a comfortable routine. Rose worked in the office during the day, organizing records, managing accounts, and handling correspondence. She took her meals with Samuel, Ethan, and Mrs. Chen, and she spent her evenings reading or sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the valley. It was a peaceful existence, and Rose found herself healing from the trauma of her recent experiences. But as the weeks passed, she also became increasingly aware of Ethan's presence. He was always kind and respectful, but there were moments when their eyes would meet across the dinner table, or when their hands would brush as he passed her a document that made Rose's heart race and her cheeks flush. She tried to tell herself that she was being foolish, that Ethan saw her only as someone he had helped and nothing more. But the warmth in his gray eyes when he looked at her suggested otherwise, and Rose found herself hoping against hope that perhaps he felt something for her too. One evening, about 3 weeks into her employment, Rose was sitting on the porch enjoying the cool air after a hot day when Ethan joined her. He sat down on the steps beside her chair, stretching out his long legs with a tired sigh. "You look exhausted," Rose observed. "We have been moving cattle to new grazing areas," Ethan explained. "It is necessary but hard work, and I am not as young as I used to be." Rose laughed. "You cannot be more than 25. That is hardly old." 26, actually," Ethan corrected with a grin. "And how old are you, Rose Sutherland, if you do not mind me asking?" "I am 22, Rose replied, "though sometimes I feel much older." "I know what you mean," Ethan said softly. "Life out here ages a person quickly, but not always in bad ways. Sometimes it just teaches you what is important and what is not." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Rose was acutely aware of Ethan's proximity, of the way the fading light cast shadows across his strong features. She wanted to say something, to tell him how much his kindness had meant to her, but the words seemed inadequate for the depth of her feelings. "Rose," Ethan said finally, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something, and I do not want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. But I cannot keep it to myself any longer." Rose's heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about you constantly since the day I found you behind the saloon," Ethan admitted, still looking out at the valley rather than at her. "At first, I told myself it was just concern, that I wanted to make sure you were all right. But it is more than that, and I think you know it. I care about you, Rose, more than I probably should, considering we have only known each other for a few weeks. But I cannot help how I feel, and I needed you to know." Rose felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I care about you too," she said softly. "I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself that you were just being kind and that I should not read anything into it. But Ethan, you have been in my thoughts every day, and when I am near you, I feel something I have never felt before." Ethan finally turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made Rose's breath catch. There was longing there, and tenderness, and a fierce protectiveness that made her feel cherished in a way she had never experienced. "I do not want to rush you," Ethan said. "And I do not want to make things complicated for you here at the ranch. But Rose, I would like permission to court you properly, if you would be willing. I want to spend time with you to get to know you better, and to see if what we are both feeling might grow into something lasting." "Yes," Rose said without hesitation. "Yes, Ethan, I would like that very much." He smiled then, a genuine expression of happiness that transformed his usually serious face. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I promise I will do this right," he said. "You deserve to be courted properly, with respect and patience. I will not rush you into anything you are not ready for." "I trust you," Rose said simply, and she realized as she said it that it was completely true. Despite the short time they had known each other, she trusted Ethan Quinn in a way she had never trusted anyone before. Their courtship began slowly and carefully, always mindful of propriety and the need to maintain professional boundaries at the ranch. Ethan would take Rose for rides on Sunday afternoons, showing her the far reaches of the Double Q property and teaching her about the land and the cattle. They would talk for hours about everything and nothing, sharing their hopes and dreams and fears with an openness that felt both natural and profound. Samuel noticed the developing relationship and called Ethan into his office one evening. Rose was working late, finishing up some correspondence, and she could hear their voices through the thin walls. "That girl has been through a lot," Samuel said bluntly. "I like her, and she is doing excellent work for the ranch, but if you are courting her, you need to be serious about it. I will not have her hurt by you deciding you were just amusing yourself." "I am completely serious," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "I know it seems fast, but Rose is unlike anyone I have ever met. She is strong and intelligent and kind, and I want to build a life with her if she will have me." "Then you have my blessing," Samuel said gruffly. "But treat her right, boy. She deserves to be cherished." "I know," Ethan said softly, "and I intend to do exactly that." Rose felt warmth flood through her at his words. She had not dared to hope that Ethan's feelings ran so deep, but hearing him speak so seriously about building a life with her made her heart soar. She quietly returned to her work, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. As autumn arrived and the days grew shorter, Rose's love for Ethan deepened into something profound and unshakable. He was everything she had not known she was looking for: strong yet gentle, serious yet capable of laughter, hardworking yet always making time for her. And the way he looked at her, as though she were the most precious thing in his world, made her feel beautiful and valued in a way she had never experienced. One crisp October evening, Ethan took Rose to a high meadow overlooking the ranch. The aspens had turned gold, and the setting sun painted the landscape in shades of amber and crimson. They sat together on a blanket, Ethan's arm around Rose's shoulders as they watched the light fade from the sky. "Rose," Ethan said quietly, "do you remember what I said about wanting to build a life with you?" "I remember," Rose replied, her heart beginning to race. "I meant it," Ethan continued. "These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning eager to see you, and I go to bed every night thinking about you. You have become the center of my world, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." He shifted position, and Rose realized with shock that he was kneeling beside her, holding a small velvet box in his hands. "Rose Sutherland," Ethan said, his gray eyes intense with emotion. "I love you with everything I am. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and spend the rest of your life with me here on the Double Q?" Tears streamed down Rose's face as she threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with joy. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you. I love you so much." Ethan slipped a simple gold band with a small diamond onto her finger, and then he kissed her with a tenderness that made Rose feel like she was melting. It was their first kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed it would be: sweet and passionate and full of promise. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Samuel proudly giving Rose away and Mrs. Chen serving as her attendant. The ranch hands cleaned up for the occasion, and even some of the neighboring ranchers came to celebrate. Rose wore a new dress of deep blue silk that Ethan had ordered specially from Cheyenne, and she had never felt more beautiful than when she saw the look in her husband's eyes as she walked toward him. Their wedding night was tender and loving, and Rose marveled at how Ethan managed to be both passionate and patient, always attuned to her comfort and pleasure. They talked late into the night, lying in each other's arms and planning their future together. "I want to expand the horse breeding operation," Ethan said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Rose's arm. "My uncle has been talking about it for years, but he has never had the capital or the time to really invest in it. With your help managing the finances, I think we could make it work." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Rose said enthusiastically. "The books show that the ranch is financially stable and there is definitely room for expansion. We should sit down with Samuel and work out a detailed plan." "We make a good team," Ethan said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "In business and in life. The best team," Rose agreed, snuggling closer to her husband's warmth. The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and deep happiness. Rose continued to manage the ranch accounts while also learning the domestic skills necessary for ranch life. Mrs. Chen taught her to cook hearty meals for hungry cowboys, to preserve food for the long winter months, and to keep a home comfortable and welcoming. Rose also learned to ride properly, spending hours in the saddle beside Ethan as he worked with the horses he was breeding and training. Samuel seemed to grow younger with Rose and Ethan's happiness, taking renewed interest in the ranch and in life generally. He often said that having young people and their energy in the house had reminded him what it felt like to have a family, and he clearly adored Rose as the daughter he had never had. In the spring, Rose discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of pink and gold. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Ethan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, and finally a fierce protectiveness that made Rose's heart swell with love. "A baby," he said reverently. "Rose, we are going to be parents." "We are," Rose confirmed, laughing at his obvious delight. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to describe it," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me everything, Rose. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." Samuel was equally thrilled when they told him, immediately beginning to plan additions to the house to accommodate the growing family. Mrs. Chen started knitting tiny clothes and blankets, her stern face softening whenever she looked at Rose's expanding belly. The pregnancy was not easy, and Rose struggled with sickness and exhaustion in the early months. But Ethan was endlessly patient and supportive, taking over many of her tasks and making sure she rested. He would sit with her in the evenings, his hand on her stomach, talking to their unborn child and making plans for the future. In late autumn, just as the first snow began to fall, Rose went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when both she and Ethan were terrified. But Mrs. Chen had assisted at many births, and she guided Rose through the process with calm efficiency. Finally, after 18 hours of labor, their son was born, a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. "He is perfect," Ethan breathed, holding his son with awkward tenderness. "Rose, he is absolutely perfect." "He looks like you," Rose said weakly, exhausted but elated. "He has your eyes." They named him William Samuel Quinn, after both his grandfather and his great-uncle, though everyone immediately started calling him Will. Samuel was openly emotional when he held his namesake. tears streaming down his weathered face as he looked at the baby who represented the continuation of the Quinn family line. Motherhood transformed Rose in ways she had not anticipated. She had always been capable and competent, but now she discovered a fierce maternal love that was unlike anything she had experienced. Watching Ethan with their son also deepened her love for her husband, seeing his gentleness and patience as he learned to care for the tiny human they had created together. Will was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Emma Grace, who had her mother's red-brown hair and delicate features, but her father's stubborn determination. Ethan was just as devoted to his daughter as he was to his son, and Rose often found him sitting in the rocking chair with Emma asleep on his chest, both of them looking completely content. The years passed in a blur of work and family life. The horse breeding operation that Ethan had dreamed of became a reality, and the Double Q became known throughout South Dakota and beyond for producing quality horses. Rose managed the business side of the operation with skill and efficiency, her reputation as a shrewd businesswoman growing along with the ranch's success. Samuel lived to see his grandchildren, though great-nephew and great-niece technically, grow into young childhood before he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. His death was a blow to the entire family, but especially to Ethan, who had lost the man who had been more father than uncle to him. But Samuel had lived to see the Double Q thriving and his family happy, and everyone agreed that he had died content. Ethan inherited the ranch, and he and Rose continued to build on the foundation Samuel had laid. They added more land, expanded the horse breeding program, and invested in improving their cattle stock. The ranch prospered, and so did their family. 2 more children followed Emma, another son named Jacob and a daughter named Sarah, completing their family of 4 children. Rose never forgot the desperate, starving woman she had been that night behind the saloon in Lead. Sometimes, when she was working in the ranch office or sitting on the porch watching her children play, she would remember that moment when Ethan had found her begging for scraps. And she would feel overwhelming gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together, for the kindness of a cowboy who had seen her desperation and chosen to help rather than look away. One evening, when they had been married for 15 years and their oldest son was nearly grown, Rose and Ethan sat together on their porch watching the sunset. It was the same view they had watched on the night he proposed, and Rose felt the same sense of peace and contentment she had felt then, only deeper and richer with the passage of time. "You ever think about that night I found you?" Ethan asked suddenly, as though reading her thoughts. "I think about it often," Rose admitted. "I was so desperate and so scared, and then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not even known I was praying. You saved my life that night, Ethan." "You saved mine too," Ethan said softly. "I did not even know I was lonely until I met you. I thought I was content with my life, working for my uncle and drifting through the days. But you showed me what it meant to really live, to love and be loved in return. We saved each other, Rose." "We did," Rose agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And we built something beautiful together." "The most beautiful thing," Ethan murmured, his arm tightening around her. "A life, a family, a legacy. All because I happened to walk around the back of a saloon one night and found the woman who would become the center of my world." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, both of them filled with gratitude for the life they had built together. In the distance, they could hear their children's laughter as they played in the yard, the sound as sweet as music. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. They celebrated their children's graduations and weddings, welcomed grandchildren with the same joy they had welcomed their own children, and faced the inevitable losses that come with growing older. Through it all, Rose and Ethan's love remained constant, a steady anchor in the changing tides of life. When they were both in their 70s, sitting together on the same porch where they had spent so many evenings, Ethan took Rose's weathered hand in his own. "You have any regrets?" he asked. Rose thought for a long moment, looking back over the decades they had shared. She thought about the scared, starving young woman she had been, begging for scraps at the back door of a saloon. She thought about the cowboy who had taken her inside and bought her dinner, who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. She thought about the life they had built together, the children they had raised, the ranch they had grown, and the love that had sustained them through everything. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Not one single regret. Everything that happened, every choice I made, every twist of fate brought me here to this life with you, and I would not change a moment of it." "Neither would I," Ethan said, lifting her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You have been the greatest blessing of my life, Rose Quinn. From that first night to this very moment, loving you has been the honor of my existence." They sat together as the sun set once more over the valley, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. The Double Q Ranch thrived under the management of their children and grandchildren, a testament to the foundation Rose and Ethan had built together. And as the stars came out above the black hills of South Dakota, illuminating the land they had devoted their lives to, Rose and Ethan held hands and gave thanks for the day a desperate woman had begged for scraps, and a kind cowboy had offered her not just dinner, but a future filled with love and possibility.